In this video, I'm going to show you how you can create your very own extension inside of Visual Studio Code, like I've done with this WDS blog search, and how you can install it and actually run the command, for example, search WDS blog, and actually I can search for any article in my blog with this extension, click on it, and it'll allow me to open up that blog inside of my browser. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name is Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. Now, in order to build out that extension, we're going to be using the Visual Studio Code documentation. They have getting started documentation on building out your first extension, and this documentation is really thorough and really well documented. And to get started, all we need to do is run this simple command to install the Yo library and the generator code library globally onto our computer. This is just going to allow us to actually generate code that will create the extension shell for us so that we can actually start programming out the extension, because there's actually a lot of boilerplate code that we need to generate. So once this is done installing, I'll be back to you. Okay, so that just finished installing, and the next step is to essentially just run the command yo code, and that's going to give us a bunch of prompts that we need to fill out. They're going to tell us how we want to generate this extension. So the first thing it's saying is what type of extension do you want to create? And you can just use the arrow keys to choose your option. We're going to be choosing an extension written in JavaScript, so just hit enter. And then we type in the name of our extension. We're going to call this WDS search blog example. You can call yours whatever you want it to be, doesn't really matter. And you can change this later, so it's not like set in stone. And then the identifier of your extension, I'm just going to leave that as the default, so just hit enter. And then we can enter a description if we want. I'm just going to leave it blank. And then you can see, do you want to enable JavaScript type checking? I don't, so we're just going to say no. And do you want to initialize a Git repository? Sure, we'll just say yes. And we want to use npm as our package manager. Once we specify all of those different settings, it's going to go through and generate all of the code for us inside of this folder we can see right here, WDS search blog example, and it's naming it based on the name that we provided to our extension. So now that all finished running, we can just clear this out, minimize down this terminal, and we have all the boilerplate code over here for our extension. And you'll notice it's actually a lot of code, so I'm going to kind of briefly go through what each of these sections means that we can understand exactly how this works. This .vs code file up here, this just simply sets up the ability for us to launch another version of VS Code where we can actually test our extension in. So you don't really have to worry too much about this. This is really just setting up a second version of VS Code for us to be able to run in debug mode. Node module is pretty self-explanatory. That's all of our libraries. This test folder contains any tests that we write. Right now, we don't really have any tests in here because we haven't written anything. We have an ESLint config. If you have ESLint, you can use it with this project. Simple git ignore. We have a VS Code ignore, which is similar. This is essentially things to ignore when we publish our extension, files that aren't needed for our extension when we publish it. A changelog for where we can put any changes to our extension as we publish new changes. And then the main file here, extension.js, we're going to come back to this, but this is pretty much where you write all of your code for your extension. This is where the actual code works. Then we have here just a config file for, it looks like here our compiler options for type checking and stuff. We have our package lock, our package JSON, a README, and this README is a little bit interesting because this is actually the README that gets posted with your extension. So all of the information you see when you install an extension, that comes from this README right here. And then finally, down here, we have the quick start guide for getting started. And this is really not that useful, but essentially it's just saying, here, welcome, here's some stuff that you can do to get up and running with your tools. So this is like very similar to the documentation we have over here. It's just in the actual code editor, so we can read it in here if we want. But like I said, almost all of our code is inside this extension.js file. Now, before we start diving into exactly what all of this code does, first we're going to run the program because it already has a default Hello World application installed. So to do that, you can click the F5 key on your keyboard and you can say, where do you want to start this up? You can say VS Code extension deployment preview. So if we just click on that, it's going to open up a new VS Code window. I'll drag mine over so we can see it. And this new VS Code window has our extension installed inside of it. And down here in our debug console, we just kind of get some text being printed out saying what's all going on. You can kind of ignore what's in here right now because I have other extensions running that are printing out things to this console. So don't really worry too much about that. But if you hit Control-Shift-P, that's going to open up this window where you can actually run commands that are installed in VS Code. And the command that this extension comes with by default is called Hello World. So we can just run this Hello World command. And down here at the very bottom, it's pretty small to see. It says Hello World from WDS search blog example. And that'll just say hello from whatever you named your extension. So that's just how we know that everything by default is working. Let me just minimize this screen so we kind of have our full screen here as big as possible, and we can kind of go over what this code is doing. So let's go back to our files. At the very top, we're requiring VS Code. It's just because this is the library we're using to be able to interact with VS Code. So require the VS Code library because it's all written in Node.js. So we have to use this require syntax instead of the normal import export syntax. I'm going to clean up some of these comments just so our code is easier to look at. So we're requiring VS Code up here, and then we have this activate function. This activate function, if we just go back for the comment here, essentially this is called as soon as your extension is activated. So it's the very first time your extension becomes active. Pretty much when they open up VS Code, this activate function is going to run. So we can actually just come in here and say, actually it even says right here, console log, congratulations, your extension blog is now active. And that's being printed out right here. So we can already see that this active is only really being run once, because if I run the command hello world over here again, you can see it says hello world in the browser, but it doesn't reprint this congratulations. So this active is only run one time. Then if we just minimize this, we also have this deactivate function, and this is pretty much the exact opposite of active. It'd be like mount and unmount inside of React. This is just called to clean everything up if we have things that we need to clean up. For now, we don't really need this, but we still are returning it as just an empty function. Now further inside of here, we can just remove this line of code because we don't actually need this console log. And then you can see here, we have a disposable, and this is registering a command with the name WDS search blog example.hello world. And inside of here is just a function of code, and this code is what gives us that message when we run that hello world command. So how exactly are these commands hooked up? Because right now you'll see this really long command name, but when we typed in our command over here, we just typed in hello world. And the way that these are linked together is inside your package JSON. If we go here to this contribute section, we have this commands array, and inside of here you can see we have our command, which is the long name inside of our code, and then we have the title. The title is what the user actually types in, and command is the thing that links your code to your package JSON. So this extensions file has this really long name right here, hello world, and that's being linked here to this command. So if we wanted to be able to change the name of our command, we could just come in here and change this from hello world to like search WDS blog example. That's going to be our command name. Let's just do lowercase WDS. And we can change our title to search WDS blog example. And then up here, we have these activation events. We want to say that we're changing this command from hello world to search WDS blog example. That's all the changes we need to make in our package JSON. Then if we go to our extension, we can come in here and just change this to search WDS blog example. And now if we come back over to our window, we can hit Control-Shift-P and type in this developer reload window. If you just type in reload, it should pop up. That's going to refresh our VS Code instance. So then we can come in here and we could say something along the lines of search WDS blog example. And if we just hit enter on this, we get the exact same message showing up at the bottom. It's a little bit difficult to see. Let me just move my camera. You can see down there at the very bottom, that's the message that's popping up. And that's just because we haven't changed any of the code, but we changed the command we run in order to run the code in this function. So that's how you kind of link up commands. You have this register command function that you run. You pass it the name of the command and a function that's associated with the command. And then the package JSON, you hook all those up in this commands array and this activation events array to be able to say what your different commands are. So now that we have that done, we can actually focus on the code inside of this function that's searching my blog. And the best way that we can actually search my blog, since I don't have any form of API, is just to use the RSS feed. So if we go to blog.webdevsimplified.com, and we go /rss.xml, this is going to give us the XML feed, which contains all of my different blog articles, because this is just the RSS feed. So this is just XML data that we're going to get returned. So we want to request this URL. And the best way to make a request in my example is to use a library called Axios. So if we go over to our terminal, we can just npm i Axios, and that's going to install the Axios library for us to use. And up here, we can just say const Axios equals require, and we want to require Axios, just like that. So now we have access to Axios, and you may be thinking, okay, inside the function, we're going to make this call for Axios. But actually, I want to put this function call inside of activate. And that's because I want to fetch all of these blog articles once and then never refetch them again. If we put this fetch command inside of the actual command itself, what that's going to do is cause us to fetch the blog articles every single time we run this command. And since these blog articles don't change very much, we really only need to fetch them once every time they activate the extension. So up here in activate, I want to just get our results. We're just going to call it res, and that's just going to be equal to await, because we're going to be using async await. So let's make this an async function. So if you're not used to async await, make sure you check out my video on it. I'll link in the cards and description. But we want to call axios.get because we're going to be getting the URL up here. So let me just copy this URL and paste it down. So we're just going to be getting the XML RSS feed that we're seeing on the right side of our screen with Axios by using this. And then we can actually get the data, which is just res.data. And let's just log this out to see what this looks like. So we can say console.log res.data, and we can just minimize out of this. Over here, make sure we reload the window. And if we go back to our debug console, we should hopefully see some things being printed out when we activate the extension. So if we just say search WDS blog example, it's activating the extension because it's the first time we're running it. And you can see down here, we're getting all of the different XML being printed out to the screen. And unfortunately, XML is pretty hard to work with in JavaScript. So we're also going to be using a library to parse the XML into a JavaScript object so it'll become easier to work with. Now this library we're going to be installing up here is called FastXML_parse. So we're going to get an XML parser equal to require FastXML parser, and then we just need to install that in our terminal. So we'll say npm I fastxml parser. There we go. This is going to be the parser that'll convert XML into JSON. So to do that, we can just say that we're going to be converting XML parser.parse. That's going to parse our res.data, which is what we're logging out down here. And all we want to do is now log out this. So let's just replace our data with the return from this to see if it actually makes a difference. And of course, we'll reload our window to restart our extension, go over to the debug console, and then just run search WDS blog example. And when we search this, you see we now get an object being printed out. This object has an RSS feed, it has channel, it has a bunch of information about my blog, but the thing we're most caring about down here is our item, because this item is each one of our individual blog articles with a title, description, link, a GUID, a pub date, so on and so forth. So we want to parse this object by getting information from it because we want the articles. But to get the articles from this data, we need to go down a few levels. We need to get first the RSS information, then inside the channel, we have this thing called item. And this thing called item contains all of our different articles. It's an array. So now if we print out articles, we should hopefully have each one of our articles being printed out based on this little bit of code. And again, we can just reload the window and we can run that command, which is search WDS blog example. And we should hopefully see, we scroll all the way down to the bottom here, we have an array which has 69 objects in it, and these are the 69 articles that are on my blog. Now the next thing that we need to do is actually make our command work, because what I want to do is I want to show a list of all the articles with a search box at the top that allows me to pick one of those articles. And that may sound like a fairly difficult thing to do, but luckily VS Code actually has this functionality built in. I mean, if you just think about this menu right here, this is essentially exactly what we want. We want a menu where we can type something in and it'll filter the list of items below it. So in order to do that with VS Code, let's just get rid of all of this code here, get rid of these comments, just so the code's easier to read. So this is just our function here. All we need to do with this function is just say that we want a vscode.window.showQuickPick. And this is going to give us a menu that looks very similar to the menu up here where we have a list and we can start typing in it to find matching things. And this show quick pick is going to take a few different parameters. The first one is the list of all the different things that we actually want to render, which in our case are our articles. And then it's going to take a second object here, and this object is going to determine a few different options. Essentially, this is going to determine how we match different objects. And the things inside of this menu can have a few different parameters. Here you can see it just has a label, but you can also have a description below the label, which they call a detail. And we want to be able to match any of the strings we type in, either on the title of the article or the description of the article. And since it's called a detail, we're going to say match on detail to be true, so that we can match both the title and the description of the article. With all of that done, that is going to be an async function. So we're just going to wait that, make sure this is async here, and we're going to set this equal to article. And that's because this waits until someone picks something from the menu, and then it returns it as the result. So we're going to return that as an article. Then we can use that article to do whatever we want. So down here, we can just say console.log article. And unfortunately, it's not quite as easy as just doing this, because this is actually not quite going to work. If we just reload our window and we try to run that command, we're most likely going to get some form of error. So let's just run the command, search WDS blog example. And when we run this, you see that we get this thing showing up at the top, and we can start typing inside of it, but there's no items in the list. And that's because VS Code expects the items in a quick pick to have a very specific structure. They should have a label, which is the thing it shows, and then you can have an optional detail, which is going to be the thing that shows us the description. So we would need to take our article and convert the objects that we have right now, which if we look at one of these have a title, description, link, and so on. And we need to convert this so that it has information such as label and detail. So let's do that. We can just do a quick map on each one of these articles. And for each one of these articles, we just want to essentially return an object, and this object is going to have the information inside of it that we need. So we're going to need a label, which is our article.title, and our detail, which is our article.description. And if I just spell article up here correctly, this right there should return that information to us. And to make it a little bit more explicit what we're doing, let's just turn this into an actual return statement like that. And now our articles should be converted to a label detail type of structure. And if we just refresh everything by just doing that reload command again, make sure we run this reload window. And of course, this reload window is actually not working. And that's because we're essentially awaiting forever and it never actually returned from here. So let's just try this again, reload window, and it's still not working. So we kind of broke things by freezing everything up and waiting forever. Let's just do a hard reset right here. That's essentially the same thing as refreshing the window. And now we can come over here, search WDS blog example, hit enter on that. And now you can see we have a list of all of our different articles. And if we click on one of these, we should see that we get an object being returned with that label and that detail. That is great, but we also need the information for the link of the article so we can render that article in a web page. So to do that, let's just pass in the link as well. And this link isn't anything that's going to be displayed to the user because right now only label and detail are displayed because that's specifically how Quick Pick works, but it's going to use that link and keep it inside of our data. So if we just do a quick reload again, and we just run that exact same command of search WDS blog, wait for everything to load up real quick, you can see everything still shows up. I can click on one of these, and now my new object has that link being returned with it. So we can actually use that link now to actually render that inside of a web page. And that is what we're going to do here instead of logging out the article. The first thing I want to do is just make sure they selected an article. So if they didn't select an article, we're just going to return exit out immediately. But if they did select an article, we need to use vscode.env.openExternal. This allows us to open an external URL. So inside of here, all we need to do is just say article.link and save that, reload our page over here, give it a second to reload, and we now can just search WDS blog. It's going to give us the window that we can pick from in just a second. Let's say that we want to search for a React article, so we'll search for React. You can see, let's do how to use refs in React with hooks. We'll click on that. It says, do you want to open the external website? This is just something VS Code always does. We'll just click open, and then you can see it pops up that article, how to use refs in React with hooks, and we can read through the entire article if we want, and we can close out of it when we're done. So now we've essentially written out an entire extension that works. We can actually just stop running this because we know that this is the final result of what we want our extension to do. The next step is going to be publishing that extension. So if we go to VS Code, we have publishing documents for publishing the extension, and these documentation is really easy to follow. First thing we need to do is install this library right here called VSCE. This is just going to help us with publishing everything. And if we just go over to the terminal, we can run that real quick and it will install this NPM package for us. Then what we need to do is just make sure we're inside of the library that contains this package or inside the folder. So we need to make sure we cd into that folder. So we can just say cd wds search blog example. Now we're inside of the search blog example. And I actually realized it looks like we were not in that folder when we installed all these extensions here for Axios and Fast XML parser. So what I want to do is I just want to say npm I Axios and Fast XML parser. And that'll just make sure that these libraries are actually installed inside of this WDS search blog example folder. We don't actually need these out here. That's going to actually install them in the correct location. So we should be able to see inside of here, we have Axios installed now, which is exactly what we want. So now what we can actually do is just run these different commands. But right now, you're not going to be able to publish this extension because you need an account to publish an extension, a Microsoft account. So if we scroll down here a little ways, we can come all the way down to the section that says VS Code leverages Azure DevOps for its marketplace, and you can only publish extensions using a personal access token. So the first thing you need to make sure you do is have an Azure DevOps account or an organization. So if you click on this link right here, it's going to take you to the documentation for creating an organization in Azure DevOps. And what you can do is just come all the way down here a little ways, see it says create an organization, click on that, and that's going to bring you to this dev.azure.com, and it allows you to sign in. If you just search for Azure DevOps login, you can log in, and what you want to do is create an organization. So let me just expand this a little bit. You can see I've already created an organization called Web Dev Simplified. If you don't already have an account, you're going to need to create an account. So you can create whatever account that you want, and then you're going to create an organization by just clicking this new organization button right here and filling out the information that you need. I'm not going to do this because I already have an organization, but it's really self-explanatory. Then once you have an organization, just select it, come up here, and you'll see personal access tokens. Click on that button. This is where you create a new token. Right now I already have a token because my extension's already published, but we're going to create a brand new one. Call it whatever you want. I'm going to call this VS Code example, and you want to make sure here where it says organization that this is set to all accessible organizations, otherwise it won't work. And you can change this expiration date if you want, leave it default, doesn't really matter. And down here you want to make sure this says custom defined scopes. Click show all scopes, which is at the very bottom of the page, and then you want to scroll until you find the section that says marketplace right here. When you find marketplace, just click this manage button. That's going to allow you to actually publish these extensions to the marketplace, and then you can click create. And here it's essentially saying, make sure that you copy this personal access token. So we're just going to click copy. I'm just going to, for now, paste this into a comment here. You don't want to publish this at all, but I'm just going to paste it here so we have it for use. So then once that's done, I'm going to click close. And I'm going to go back to the documentation about publishing extensions. So we have our Azure DevOps organization. So we can scroll down a little ways. We have our personal access token, so we can keep scrolling all the way down here. And this is where it says create a publisher. Now this is actually a little bit out of date. This VSCA create publisher doesn't actually work. So what you want to do instead is scroll a little further down where it says go to the management page inside of Marketplace, and you can manually create one here. So we're going to click on that. And here what we can see is my extension that I already have published. What you want to do here is just click this create publisher button, and this allows you to create a publisher. Let me just expand this a little ways because there's really no padding on this page. And all you need to do here is type in your name. So we can just type in whatever we want. We have an ID down here. So if we have a space in our name, it's just going to remove it. So just type in a name, type in an ID, and then you can click create down here at the bottom. I'm not going to do that because I already have an organization, but that's how you'll do it. And you're going to get to here where it says your publisher name on the left, and yours should not have anything here. It'll probably say upload a new extension because you don't have any extensions. That's perfectly okay. Once you get this far, that's all that matters. You just need to remember the ID of your publisher, which is right here next to the name. I'm just copying mine right now. Now back here, we can log in as that publisher. So we can come in here and type in VSCE, log in, and we want to paste in that publisher ID, whatever yours is, it doesn't matter. And we click enter. And that's going to log us in as soon as we paste in our personal access token. So I'm just going to copy this personal access token. I'm going to paste it down, hit enter, and you can see we're now logged in as that user. And I want to make sure I remove this personal access token here so that it's not part of the actual code that we're publishing to GitHub. That would be very bad. So now we can just do VSCE publish, and that is going to publish our extension. But you're going to notice we're going to get an error when we try this. So if we just type in VSCE publish, you're going to see here that it says missing publisher name. All that means is in our package.json, we need to specify our publisher, which in our case is just that web dev simplified name. So web dev simplified. Save this, and now we can rerun this command and give it a little second to run here, and hopefully that should be all we need, but of course it's not. It's saying make sure to edit the README file before you package or publish your extension. And that's because this README file is what shows up inside your extension. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change this to say test, because this is just for testing and example purposes, but you should write out an actual README. Then we can run this now, and it should hopefully work this time. It might ask us a question. It's saying a repository field is missing from your package.json. Do you want to continue? I'm going to say yes, because we don't actually have a Git repository for this. And now it's actually publishing that extension for us. Now it takes a little bit of time for your extension to first show up. But if we come over to managing our extensions and we just refresh this page real quick, we should see our WDS search is right there, and it's currently being verified. Once this verification finishes, we can actually find and search that extension inside of VS Code. Okay, so I just sat here for a couple minutes. It just finished and verified my extension. So if I come over to the extensions, I can search WDS, and you can see we have WDS search blog examples showing up, which shows that our extension can be literally downloaded by anyone across the entire world. Now I'm going to be deleting this example extension, but if you want, you can download my WDS blog search extension and actually use it inside of your own Visual Studio Code to search for any of my blog articles if you're coming across a problem and want to be able to search for it quickly inside of Visual Studio Code. And with that said, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you want, check out some of my other videos. They're going to be linked over here, and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.